All right, so last week we ended off on page 299. We're in the second explanation of Hillel Parsha. We're doing, as we said last week, the second one first, and then we'll go back to the first one, and then we'll go back, and then we'll go to the inside, what the Mendel Rebbe said. So we are on the bottom of the left column, Ume'ata. Before we start, just to give a recap for those who missed last week, or just for those who didn't miss last week but don't remember last week, we will recap a little bit what we spoke about last week. So we started off with the Rambam, Maimonides. Maimonides says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. The Lord, our God, the Lord is one." And he goes into... Maimonides says that this is a positive commandment. This is an actual one of the 613 commandments, knowledge of God, unifying God's name. So Hillel Parsha he zeroes in on the language. As we know in the Torah, that language, that no word is wasted, no word is coincidental. The picking of every single word, there's a reason that each word is specifically as it is. So he zeroes in on why does it say Shema, hear, O Israel, and he says that this word Shema, hearing, it denotes he's talking about hearing of the mind, just meaning hearing of the mind as opposed to seeing of the mind. It says hear, O Israel, not Re'eh Israel, not see, O Israel. So he infers from this that Maimonides specifically is saying that we have to understand God in a way of hearing. And by hearing, meaning hearing of the mind, such as when somebody tells you something and you understand it, and you say, "I hear you." So, as opposed to seeing of the mind, which is a different level. Now he's going to explain what seeing and what hearing is, and I'll go further into that. So then he begins to tell us that there are three different levels in the intellect. It's made up of three components: Chachma, Bina, Da'as, which, if you remember, we did not translate them with a word. As opposed to translating them, we opted to explain what they are, and that way we can continue to use the word Chachma, and you don't have to have a translation because you'll know what that word Chachma means, being that there isn't necessarily an English word that is exactly appropriate to define it. So he started with two things, Chachma and Bina. Chachma being higher, Chachma being the seeing, as if he would have said, "See, O Israel." Whereas Bina is hearing of the mind. So Chachma, he gives the first example he gives is a building. You're looking at a building. And if you see the building very quickly, and you don't really yet, you can't explain to somebody its components because you saw it just briefly. Now, even though you saw it just briefly, you still are affected by it. You can say, "Wow, what a beautiful building. It was beautiful. I saw it for a second. Can you explain me, what did it have? Was there arches? What was the stonework? What was it? What were the angles? What was the colors?" And maybe you can't really explain it, but you caught the essence of that building, that it's a beautiful building. So that is the higher level called Chachma. You've understood it in a Chachma way, in a very quick, at a single glance sort of way. Then comes Bina, and Bina is when you can essentially, when it becomes connected to letters, which means that you can give it over to somebody else, where you can explain that there is it has arches and the symmetry of it, and the height of it, and the angles and the colors and all these things, which you can now explain. This is Bina. It's the lower level of Bina, and this is the level where Maimonides is asking us to understand God. That this is the level that God has to be understood with. This level of Bina, of being able to give it over to somebody else because it's enclosed in letters already. Now, if you remember, when we spoke about Chachma and Bina, Chachma is the essence of the concept, whereas Bina is just words. It's just an outside thing. If I'm giving you an explanation of the concept, I'm not really giving you the concept. I'm giving you. It's almost like if I wanted to show you a picture, and I made dots around it, around the shape of a dog or something. And the more dots I put around it, even though I'm not really showing you anything about the picture, the more dots I put, the clearer that silhouette comes into view, and the clearer you can see this this silhouette of this animal that I'm trying to depict to you. So that's Bina. That's in seeing a physical thing. In addition, he also explained that there's also in discussing a concept, for example, or making decisions, making legal decisions, where he brought the case from the Talmud, where there was, where Rav made a ruling, and his ruling was contested, and he could not explain why he was right. It would seem that those that contested his ruling, it was a valid argument, and he couldn't answer it. Yet he held by his ruling. And the explanation is that he saw that the ruling was right in a way of chachma. He saw it in a way of chachma, in the essence of the matter, but he was not able to bring it down into a bina way, in a way that it was in letters that it could be given over to somebody else. And then it turns out later that there was one of the sages that actually explained why Rav in fact was right. In other words, he took this decision that Rav made in a way of chachma, and he brought it down into a way of bina, where it could be explained with letters. He brings then the third level of intellect, which is das, which he says das is neither. It's neither a way of understanding it or a way of intellectualizing it. It's not a chachma, it's not a bina, but rather it is the connecting of the chachma and or bina. It's becoming connected to the item that you're doing the chachma and bina on. The example is, which means also, for example, concentration. Concentration comes from das, and one example that he gives is, let's say you have two people who are of equal intellect and of equal their level of talent is equal, but you have one person who's really excited about a certain concept, and then you have another person who has no interest at all. In other words, their chachma and their bina are equal, but the das of the person who's interested is going to be a much more intense das. His connection to the subject matter is going to be a lot stronger. Being that his connection is a lot stronger, it goes without saying, we know that this person he will be able to spend more time. If I'm interested in something and you have no interest in it, let's pick cigars for example. Let's say I am somebody who loves cigars. I'm very interested in cigars. And you have no interest at all in cigars. And now we go up to a very long online cigar review that goes into every single characteristic of a certain specific cigar. Maybe a cigar that I haven't ever even smoked before. But yet, so you're going to look at this and go, I don't have time to read this. I don't have the interest to read this. Because you don't have a das connection to it. Now, on the other hand, since I have an interest in this, since my das is connected to it, I'm going to spend a lot of time and effort focusing on it. And I'm going to be able to understand this a lot better than you can, even though our chachma and our bina is equivalent. And then the last thing we discussed last week was that the source of the das, where does it come from? It comes from somebody who has a chush in this thing. What is a chush? A chush is the connection. It is the connection of the will, of the desire at the time the item is desired. So that was basically what we spoke last week. That we left off with that essentially the connection of, in other words, if this feeling of desiring something at the time that you desire this item, which is a very powerful feeling. So this is basically this is what fuels the connection. Why I would be more connected to this intellect than somebody else would be. Okay, one moment. If anyone else who's on, if you could please mute your microphone, or I can do it here. There we go. Okay. So now we go. Mi'ata yesh lahavin et sheyesh b'kol echad migimul chalki haseichel Chabad anal. Gimel b'chinas. So now we're going to subsplit these three intellectual categories that we spoke about, Chachma, Bina, and Das, and we're going to subsplit them. So in each one of these three things, of Chachma, Bina, and Das, there are three levels, which is Aymek, Ayrech, V'Raichav. Depth, length, and width. Basically the three dimensions. So the Chabad is a three-dimensional concept. The depth is not part of the essence at all. But rather it is a connector from essence to essence, from the essence of one thing to the essence of another thing. But actually it in itself is a level of nothing. It is actually non-existent. So what do we mean by a non-existent thing that connects two items, the essence of two items? So Ilparcha will give you now an example. K'may keren shemechaber shtei adfonis, the mizrach v'dar. So like a corner that connects two walls of east and south. In this case, it could be any east and north, west and north, doesn't make a difference. But that connects two walls. Shekol mashi yitzayir reizem mohos, that anything that you will ascribe to any sort of material existence in the walls, shaykh l'dayfen mizrach el dayfen darim. But rather, any part that you will look at is either part of the eastern wall or it's part of the southern wall. So the corner in itself, in other words, we're not talking about like when you look at a wall and saying, oh, here's the general corner area. But if we're actually going to define the actual corner, the actual point where the two walls meet, assuming that we're talking about an exact right angle, there is no corner. It's either east wall or south wall. And the further you go, so you're going further on the south wall, you can go further on the east wall, but finally the point where they connect is a non-existent line between what's east wall and between what's south wall. Another example, and also the what's it called between the suns, the twilight. In other words, the point where day and night meet. There is this time where day and night meet is non-existent. There is no time. There is no time that day and night meet. It's either day now or it's night now. And there comes a point where it changes from day to night. But this time of the meeting of day and night is a non-existent time. As soon as that clock flips, it's now night. When it flips, now it's day. There isn't a point you could say, you know what? Why don't we're going to have a birthday party. Let's have a birthday party, and we'll start at the time that's in between the day and night. Let's just have the whole birthday party at a time that's between day and night. There is no time between day and night. It can either be in the day, it can be in the night. But yet, we call it a corner. We call a corner. So this is essentially the depth, the concept of the depth. The depth is in itself really a non-existent thing, but it connects one being to another being, the essence of one being to the essence of another being. now bringing it into a more spiritual or more abstract allegory. From a teacher who is giving over an intellect to a student. That the person giving over, the teacher, has to have an element of nothingness to him. What does it mean, nothingness? Shehu hanochas atzmius sichle yeruchni. Hamavil islabshus b'seichel shelefi erich kli makabel v'chein b'makabel. So the teacher, let's say we're talking about a professor, and he is a brilliant professor, and this is a professor that all of his life has taught, college level mathematics in a university. Now, anyways, the university runs out of funds, or he gets in a fight with the dean, or whatever it is, whatever you want to, or he just needs side money, and he goes and he tutors a kid in second grade, first grade, whatever. If he's going to sit there and try to teach the kid his college level studies, it's not going to go too well. So this teacher has to take all of his knowledge and essentially pull it away. And he has to be able to bring it down to the point where the student can receive what he's giving over. So he has to nullify himself essentially and put himself aside and get rid of all this great stuff percolating in his mind. He has to remove it. V'chein b'makabel. The same thing with the student. The student from himself also has to have the same type of thing, the same type of putting himself aside. Murach li is bittel v'shim b'sichlei shehayolei adhina b'chdei sheyuchel l'kabel seichel mashpia k'maimer kol talmid she'ein tzveis v'nei tzveis mar. So a student, let's say you come with your preconceived notions, and I want to believe that 5 apples and 5 apples is a million apples, because my world is happier that way. But if I'm going to understand what this teacher is teaching me, that 5 apples and 5 apples is 10 apples, I'm going to have to put myself aside and focus on what the teacher is telling me. Like it says that any student, a bitter student, is one who doesn't, that his lips aren't following along with when the teacher is reading. So this is the nothingness of the recipient, of the student, which is the being humble, because he has to be humble to the teacher. He has to accept that what the teacher is teaching him is superior to his knowledge, and he has to put himself aside. And the more that the student puts himself aside and focuses on what the teacher is teaching, the better he's going to receive from that teacher, and vice versa. The more the teacher can put all of his intellect aside and be able to just give the student, to really give the student at his level what he needs, the better he's going to be able to teach the student. V'zehu ikar ha'emek, and this is the main part of depth. Shu b'chinas ha'ayin shel ha'makabel. So in other words, the most important part is the nothingness, the nullification, the humbleness of the recipient, of the student. That through this, the transfer, the drawing down of the intellect is in its completion, is more complete. Because the whole point is that the recipient, that the student should understand it. That's the main point of this whole interaction. And through this depth, the more the depth, the better the student can understand it. And that's why in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Holy Tongue, which is essentially the biblical Hebrew, the depth is known as an empty hollow that goes lower and lower. So that's in general the concept. Now we understand in general the concept of depth, and now we're going to apply this depth to the various different aspects of intellect that we spoke about before. Chaim. Through this we can understand the concept of the depth of Chachma. If you remember the Chachma is the higher of the three levels of the intellect, and it's the level of seeing, of understanding something in its essence, but before before it can be related in letters, before it can be given over to somebody else. So very essential, the essential understanding of a concept. So that's Chachma. So in Chachma, what is the depth? Even though Chachma is the level of a mashpia, of the teacher, the one that gives over, as compared to the lower level of Bina, Mikol Mokim, Hu Bechinas Mekabel, Lagabe, L'mayla Min HaChachma Hanikra Maskil. So even though the Chachma gives over to the lower Bina, but in the Chachma itself there is something higher than the Chachma. And so it has to be able to receive from this thing that's higher than Chachma. And what's this thing that's higher than Chachma? What's higher than in Chachma is essentially the idea when it first enters when it's first in the mind, when it first enters the mind. So what's higher than this is a level called a maskil. What's maskil? Vehine keach maskil, the power of maskil, who hashayer b'lachluchis haruchnish b'mayachasasum. So he's actually giving you the physical / spiritual location of it. It's giving you, in other words, in the mind, in the brain, there's different parts of the brain, and there's membranes that are on top of the brain, and the skull, and all these different things. And each one of these physical elements of the human brain and skull is the seat of a more spiritual element, or where a spiritual power can come and essentially turn into a physical thing. And that's why in general science has a very hard time with thought, because even though they can see that there's certain they call them almost like electrical waves that go through the brain, but they really can't put those little Area 51 prods on somebody's brain and actually see the letters of what he's thinking or see the picture. They can see that there's activity, but they can't zero in on it. And a lot of that is because essentially the mind and the brain is a place of transmutation of spiritual powers into physical abilities. So where is this maskil, this koyach maskil, this power of maskil? It sits in the moisture, in the spiritual moisture that sits on top of the membranes, that the membranes surround the three levels of intellect of Chochmah, Bina, Das. However, in the right brain sits the Chochmah, which is the ability to receive from this koach maskil. In other words, to receive thought from above the mind. So very interesting, because one of the things, what do we call somebody who's very intuitive and somebody who's very creative and can come up with new ideas? We say right-brained, right? As opposed to somebody left-brained. What do we call somebody who's left-brained? We mean somebody who's very analytical. What's analytics? Analytics is I'm taking letters and numbers. Everything has to be in explainable letters and organized, i.e. in a bina sort of way. Whereas chachma, like an artist, he gets from his right brain. It's not something that he makes a formula or whatever. He gets this idea, he thinks, and all of a sudden he gets this idea. Where does this idea come from that he gets? It's coming from the koach hamaskil and going into the chachma. So, like for example, and then when this idea comes, when people get a flash of an idea, then they have to sit there and have to figure out their idea. Sometimes you get an idea, and you know you got an idea, but you're not 100% sure of applying it and how it works, and then you have to bring it into bina. So when you say somebody's right-brained, so here he says the chachma sits in the right brain, and the right brain is what receives from the koach hamaskil, which sits in the moisture above the membrane of the brain. Were we holding? Yeah. Now how does this thought from the koach hamaskil that is above the brain go into the chachma, into the right brain? It goes like lightning. Right? Like, the aha moment. You're sitting there, you're thinking, all of a sudden, I had an idea. Comes in like lightning. And this is the flash of the mind. That is the concept of the first revelation of an intellect in the physical mind. The Zen Nikra, what's this called? This is called Yud de Chachma. It's called the Yud of Chachma. Yud being the 10th letter of the alphabet, of the Hebrew alphabet, and the Yud is a very tiny letter, it becomes clearer later as you learn more in Hasidic philosophy. The Yud of Chachma is very important because it connects into for example the name of Yud K Vav K, what's it called, tetragrammaton, something like that. And so, but for now, we're not going to worry about that yet. We take one thing at a time. It's called the Yud of Chachma. It's called the Yud of the Chachma. Masha Enkein Shefa Zois Shakasher Hoisa Kalula B'Keich HaMaskil. However, when it's before it lightnings itself into the Chachma, when it's still in the Keich and the power of the Maskil, then what's it called? Nikra Pele V'Alif K'Moshis Bar. It's called Pele, which means wonder, and Aleph, which Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And they're actually made, Aleph and Pele are made up of the same words, backwards. Aleph, Pele, Pe Lamed Aleph, Aleph Lamed Pe. And these are different levels of the maskil as it exists within itself. And he says this, don't worry about this yet, this will be explained more at length later. Now, in order for this to work, there has to be a contracting of the light. In other words, not contracting like a home repair contractor, but contracting like it becomes contracted. Or like we were speaking before about the student and teacher that have to humble themselves, nullify themselves. So it has to contract itself. Shohu, which is, what does that mean? So So it has to contract itself because the maskil is an infinite power. So it's interesting. I don't know if you ever read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. So not to say that Hasidus officially condones that or anything, but there's some interesting things that he speaks about in how thoughts from this. In other words, he doesn't understand it, so he doesn't go straight out and say what it is. He just says he knows that there's something above the human intellect that when you focus on this thing, on the thing of your desire, that it can give over and it can draw down into your new thought, into your mind, and it's an infinite, essentially like an infinite pot that has an infinite amount of ideas in there, of thoughts in there. So similarly, this is called a hiyuli. Essentially means it means, and not to define it because we'll learn more later exactly what it is. But it's a potential kind of thing where it's an infinite potential for any sort of outcome. So the example given is, for example, this is a hand. The hand can do this, or this, or this, or that, or that, or that, and it can do an infinite amount of other moves. Now, it may never do any of those moves. For example, what if my hand stops moving, becomes paralyzed, God forbid? And so it still has in it this potential power, but it will never come to be. Or it could be that I just may never make, in a human life, we're going to make a certain amount of hand movements. We will never make an infinite amount of hand movements. So I will never fully realize every potential movement of my hand. Yet, my hand still has the potential for an infinite amount of movement. So it really doesn't exist. But there's a hiyuli in there, but in other words, it only exists retroactively if I make that movement. So in the power of maskil, that's above the intellect, there is an infinite amount of intellect there. There's an infinite amount of thought there. So, just like we spoke about with the teacher before, if you have the university level teacher who's going to teach who's going to tutor a first grader, in order for it to come to any sort of being, to come to any sort of practical being, it has to be mitzamtzim itself, it has to contract itself, it has to limit itself, it has to pull itself back. Which is putting itself aside, in order to come up with an idea for this particular thing. So you have a particular problem, right? We ran out of beer. We got a problem. Now, if your koach maskil is going to give you a suggestion on how to take elderberries and make paper out of them, that's all great, but it's not going to help you in acquiring beer. So the koach maskil, since it is infinite and it can come up with any amount of ideas and concepts and thoughts, it has to pull itself aside, and just like university level teacher with a student, and it has to be able to just give what is necessary for the problem or the subject matter at hand. And also with the chachma itself that's going to receive from the koach maskil. Right, just like it's not enough that the teacher contracts himself, but the student must also, and like before he said that even more importantly that the student has to. So in the chachma that is sitting in the right brain, this intuitive power is sitting in the right brain, so he also has to essentially eliminate, he has to put aside all of his other things and focus on the teacher. The student has to put aside its own yeshus, right? We say with a common concept of Chassidus. We always Chassidim, we tell each other often, remind each other when somebody starts getting a little too full of himself. We say, stop being a yesh. Stop. In other words, a yesh means it really just means an existence, means a thing that's in existence. And we know that one of the things in Chassidus is being humble and being not thinking of yourself as higher than anybody or anything, understanding that we're just here to do what the Eibishter wants, the one above wants us to do. So I would say, stop being a yesh. Stop being, in other words, stop being a big being. To get your ego out of it. So the chachma has to get rid of its yeshus. It has to get rid of it of the feeling of being something, and only then can it receive properly from the power of maskil that resides above the physical mind. And just like with the student, the stronger that will be this taking away of itself and focusing on the teacher, the better will be the result. And how is this done? It's done through yagiyah, through effort, through essentially concentrating, putting effort to concentrate on the subject matter or the problem or the intellect at hand. V'nimtzo sheish beis bechinis ayin de mashpia u'mekabel. So there is the nothingness of the mashpia, the influencer, u'mekabel, and the influencee. In other words, the giver and the receiver, the teacher and the student. But like we said before, what is the main one? What is the primary? What is the primary bittul? What is the primary nothingness? Is that of the recipient, that of the student. Shehu bittul shebekei chachma. In other words, the contracting of itself, the being nothing of the chachma is what is more important. Because when this is as it should be, that when the humility of the recipient is as it should be, it automatically awakens in it the will of the mashpia, or the will of the influencer, of the teacher, to also do the same and contract all of its great infinite knowledge, infinite ability, and focus on giving the student what it needs. So now this self-nullification of the chachma, this is called, like we said before, that what's depth? Depth is nothingness, right? Just like the corner. The corner is which doesn't exist. It's just a connector between two walls. So this nothingness of the chachma is called the depth of the chachma. He's taking us back to how we started it out, saying that each of these three things, of chachma, and bina, and das, there are three further elements that they sub-split into, which is depth, width, length, the depth being the nothingness. So this nothingness, this humility of the chachma to receive from the power of maskil that's in the moisture above the brain, is called the depth of chachma. That it's not part of the chachma itself. Raku ha-mechaber kayach ha-maskil la-haviyah lidei gilui ben-aviyah de-chachma shehu b'chinas barak ha-mavri kana. So it's not part of the chachma. This depth of chachma is not part of chachma. Just like, as we said before, that the corner is not part of the wall. There is this wall and there's this wall. And no matter if you go into the molecules and atoms and what are they called? The God particles. Right? No matter how far you go, it either belongs to this wall or it belongs to this wall. So the corner doesn't exist. Similarly, the depth of the chachma also does not exist. Rather, it is what connects the chachma then this it's the nullification that connects the Chachma to the power of Maskil above it, in order to allow it to bring down Neviah is like, how do you call it? It's almost like a downflow, like Neveah, like a little trickle of a stream that trickles down. In other words, to make so that the power of Maskil will make this lightning of intellect happen. This lightning the lightning strike of a new idea in the mind. How we spoke before, that the way a new idea comes into the mind is like lightning. So now we're going to give another. In the words of Bill Cosby, there's a story that he tells, and then he was telling you to introduce a different character or something, and then he says, I told you that story so I could tell you this one. So similarly, he's going to now introduce another name for this depth, which is this is a term that is much more commonly used in Hasidic philosophy. But he first wanted to give you the idea of what it is before he starts introducing it by its more classic name. This depth is also known as Keser, the crown of Chachma. And as you can imagine, there's not only a Keser of Chachma, there's going to be a Keser of Bina and a Keser of Das, and there's a Keser of Keser, but this depth is called Keser. In other words, this self-nullification, which draws down something from the higher level to be able to come into itself, is called Keser. So this depth of Chachma is also known as Keser of Chachma. We can understand it better from using a physical allegory. From you have the springs which come from the earth, they trickle out of the earth. That they have two different concepts with them. There's two different things. The first one is the revelation of the flow from the ball of the earth to the outside. Shenikra Mayon Goli, which is called a revealed spring. So that's what we see. We see when there's a rock, and out of the rock is coming a spring. So that is the first level, that revealed part of the spring. Via base, and what's the other level? The base bechinas gidei haaretz, the ara chalchuli mechalchala, shezel bechinas mayan sasum shehu is kalus hamayon b'mekeri shuatahim. Ki atahim hu makeruchni asher behalam b'yivikadoretz. So then you have the second thing, which are veins. There's all these veins that go underground. That what happens is you have the aquifer, right, as Betzalel the Maskil likes to call it. He calls it the aquifer. There's an aquifer, right, and from the aquifer comes little veins of water, little underground springs. Now what happens when one of those underground springs hits the surface? It is known as a boing spring. So that's what it's called, a spring. So the first level is the revealed spring, and the second level is these underground veins, which is what connects it to its source in the aquifer. Now, what he calls it Tahim, but then he goes on to say Tahim is actually not a physical thing. The Tahim is essentially the spiritual source of the aquifer. Because we know the aquifer is a real physical thing. והנה הגידים הללו כל מה שמסחילים בעמק יסף בכדור הארץ שוימק הראשון שלהם. So these veins of water, the deeper they start inside of the earth, inside of the ball of the earth, shehu aimek harishin shalahem, that is their first source. Yoiser niklu toikef hanaviv mayim agoli. It's the stronger will be the flow of the revealed spring. The more staunchly rooted it is into the aquifer, just like a tree, right? A tree. Which tree grows the strongest?
The one with the strongest roots.
Yep, the one that has strong roots. And you can't see the roots. And you would think that if the roots go further, it should make the tree weaker. It doesn't. The further it goes down, the better of a hold it has in its source, right? So similarly, these veins that go into the aquifer, the deeper they go down, the stronger the flow of this spring. And also it will draw out better water, a more refined water that is free of all kinds of how do you call it, like waste matter and what's it called when you have the particles. So that is the allegory. Now we come to the nimshal, the algorithm. No, what is it? What's the other part of an allegory? What do you call it? What's the English word for this? An allegory and a... What do you learn from an allegory? An algorithm? I don't know. Anyway, this is... so... So this is how it is in the power of Chachma also. Now coming back to what we learned from the allegory, to the thing that the allegory teaches us about, the lesson of the allegory, the allegorizationism, coming back to that. So just like the spring is the Chachma. There's two things in it, right? Just like with the spring, there's two elements. There's the revealed spring and the spring underground. So this is what we spoke about before, the Barak HaMavrik. The Barak HaMavrik, where was I? Yeah, over here. The Ha'al of Gilui Barak HaMavrik. One is the revelation of this lightning flash in the mind, the aha of an actual idea in the brain. You know? Right, that thing. The light bulb. And the second thing is this same thought flash that came into your mind is still connected to above the mind, to the moisture in the membrane on top of the head. It's still connected there. So this is the second one, is how just like how the spring is still connected into the aquifer, so how this flash is still connected into the power of Maskil. And what is this thing? What is this underground vein system in our nimshal, in our lesson, in our Chachma? This is what we spoke about before, that what makes the Chachma stronger, what makes it better able to what is the nullification, what is the depth of it, what makes it able to receive from higher, is effort. Right? And we know that. If you are going to have an idea, you're thinking about something, and you're trying to get a new idea, the more effort you put into trying to understand, the more effort you put into it, the better will be your idea. So this is the veins that connects it to the power of Maskil, to the infinite, to the infinite database, the infinite pot of ideas. I'm teaching you all the secrets. So this is how it connects to the database. And the stronger the effort, the better you can draw out ideas from this database. ולכן כל מה שהביטל בכלי המוח הוא בתקף יסוד. And therefore, the stronger will be, self-nullification in of the mind is stronger. Sheba mitzad yiser, meaning which comes from having more effort. Magia ba'at meselim keicha maskil b'yiser. You reach deeper into the hidden essence of the power of maskil. Lasis bay sheish maker lanvia begoli chachmas amukas rechavas harbe. So just like the spring, the more the effort, the more you have this bittul, this nullification, this self-nothingizing, right? The more you have that, the stronger you can pull out, just like the spring, the stronger you can make the flow of thought, of ideas from the power of maskil. And not only that, what was the other thing we said about the spring? The deeper it goes, the cleaner the water, and the more free from particles and from garbage. So they're also and also clean and free from mistakes. Just like these veins that go down into the deepest depths of the earth. How are we looking on time? Okay, I think good. Okay, let's do this one quick. And let's do this one quick and we'll let's recap. Good idea. Let us recap. So basically what we spoke about is really one thing. We spoke about depth. So last time we spoke about Chacham Bina Das. And now we introduced that to the Chacham Bina and Das there are three other elements, right? There is depth, width, and length. We only touched on one, which is depth. Depth equals nada, nothing. Depth is a non-existent thing that connects two things to one. What were the mashalim? What were the allegories we used? Like two walls that make a corner. Like the twilight, which connects night and day. That neither of those things exist. Everything physically is either part of one wall or part of another wall. Everything in time is part of day or night. There is no time in between day and night. So it's a non-existent place to connect. Similarly, the depth of the Chachma is the connector of the Chachma with the higher than the Chachma. The Chachma being the initial level in the in the actual intellect. So when idea first comes into the mind, it's in the Chachma. That's the highest level of intellect. So the Chachma, it needs depth. It has actually there's two levels of depth. One level of nothing is going to be how it connects lower than it to the Bina. But primarily how it connects, we're talking about how it connects higher to the infinite pot of ideas and thought that is above the mind, that resides. It's a spiritual power that resides in the moisture. That's why when you get dehydrated, you can't think. I'm just kidding. I just made that one up myself. So this is what connects to the Koyach HaMaskil, which is the infinite pot of ideas, so to speak, that is above the human mind. And the stronger will be that connect. And this is called the depth of Chachma, also known as Keser of Chachma, the crown of Chachma. And this is an important one to know because we talk a lot about Keser of different levels. And the Keser of this is also Keser of the Chachma. And the stronger will be this Keser, and the stronger that will be the effort, which is what creates this. The stronger will be those veins going down into the aquifer. The stronger will be the connection to the level higher, to the source. And the stronger will be the flow of thought and ideas. And in addition, the more clean they will be. You end up with much cleaner and mistake-free thoughts and ideas and creative thought. We're leaving off on, so you know for next time, on the bottom of page 301. For those who don't, this is the book that we are using right here. The Ner Mitzvah V'Torah, and if you don't have this book or you don't know how to get it, you can feel free to email us, to contact us on TheWellsprings.org, and we would be happy to arrange for such a book to be shipped out to you. And that's what we're holding. We are holding on the, what did I say we were? See, it's a good thing I recorded it right now. We're on page 300. 301. And we are at the bottom of the left column. Vehine Kolanal is where we will continue next time. Thank you for joining, and we will see you, God willing, next week, Tuesday, 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time.